Alright guys, so Trump's ICE Gestapo thugs continue to terrorize the state of Minnesota, and I got a whole bunch of wild stuff that I want to get to in this video. We're going to go ahead and start off here with a local police chief accusing ICE of racially profiling even his own off-duty police officers. Let's go ahead and jump into this clip here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Ruley, Police Chief of the City of Brooklyn Park. Behind me is a bunch of amazing police chiefs that are here in support of a very short but very important message that we want to share with you. What you won't hear from any of us today is rhetoric of abolish ICE or that there shouldn't be immigration enforcement. The truth is, immigration enforcement is necessary for our national security and for local security. But how it's done is extremely important. In fact, we have a long history of working exceptionally well with our federal partners, including ICE agents, and we have seen the best of them perform their job extremely well in the past. With that said, recently, as the last 2 weeks, we, as law enforcement community, have been receiving endless complaints about civil rights violations in our streets from U.S. citizens. What we're hearing is they're being stopped in traffic stops or on the street with no cause and being forced to demand paperwork to determine if they are here legally. As this went on over the past 2 weeks, we started hearing from our police officers the same complaints as they fell victim to this while off duty. Every one of these individuals is a person of color who has had this happen to them. In Brooklyn Park, one particular officer that shared her story with me was stopped as she passed ICE going down the roadway. When they boxed her in, they demanded her paperwork, of which she's a U.S. citizen and clearly would not have any paperwork. When she became concerned about the rhetoric and the way she was being treated, she pulled out her phone. In an attempt to record the incident, the phone was knocked out of her hands, preventing her from recording it. The officer had their guns drawn during this interaction. And after the officer became so concerned, they were forced to identify themselves as a Brooklyn Park police officer in hopes of slowing the incident and de-escalating the incident down. The agents then immediately left after hearing this, making no other comments, no other apologies, just got in their vehicles and left.
Do you understand how egregious ICE's behavior has to be for local police chiefs, local police departments, to be calling them out for racial profiling? I mean, that story in and of itself is just one example. It's totally insane, right? Racial profiling. They stop her. They ask for papers as if they have any right to do that in the first place. Obviously, she doesn't have any papers. I don't know about you guys, but I leave my house all the time with no sort of identification on my person. But they stop her, demand papers. Eventually, after like pulling out their guns on her, she reveals that she's an off-duty police officer, and then they just leave. They just leave the scene with no further explanation, giving a firm demonstration that even they knew they had no right to be doing what they're doing, right? But this is just one example. There have been dozens and dozens of stories like this, and in a vast majority of those cases, the people who they're stopping are not off-duty police officers who can just flex that in a way to sort of skirt out of the situation. There are people being black-bagged every single day in Minnesota and around the country. They're having their rights violated like they never existed in the first place. This is a violent rogue agency that we're talking about here in ICE. Now, we also need to remind ourselves here, because I have seen some people, even like some liberals and whatever, who have floated that, you know, this is like the ICE or that the cops are turning on ICE or whatever. Guys, the cops are not going to save you. They're not going to save me from ICE, okay? These guys are essentially the cousin agency of ICE. As he said at the beginning of that clip there, right? He doesn't support abolish ICE. They've worked together in what he views as a productive capacity in the past. They hope to get to work together in the future. The cops are not going to save us from ICE. Like, we need to remind ourselves of that. This is going to require, you know, much more of a community effort than just hoping that politicians or police officers are going to stand in between you and some rogue, violent ICE agent. It's not going to happen. Okay, now next clip we have here, continuing on the racial profiling and the expansive powers that some of these ICE goons believe that they have
been stopped for simply appearing to be Somali or appearing to be Latino or appearing to be foreign. And it's concerning because we also know we're not getting these stories from Irish folks and Norwegian folks here.
Our officers are conducting targeted enforcement, looking for the worst of the worst. But they encounter anybody in the area of which they're operating, they are okay to talk to those people. They've been authorized to talk to anybody that's around there and establish citizenship.
How is that targeted enforcement?
If they were in that area looking for a target and they were en route or coming from that target and encountered that individual, they are authorized to talk to somebody.
I mean, how do you define the area? Officers are walking down the street, driving down the street, the entire city of Minneapolis. Is everybody Potentially
Potentially
under
as-
suspicion?
No, nobody's under suspicion, but we're looking for those targets. And again, if we encounter somebody as we're walking up to a building, as we're en route to that building, that's still part of that operation as they proceed to that target.
People have
I mean, that, as the reporter was pointing out there, would encompass anything. That's an entirely arbitrary standard to say if ICE agents are en route to some person who they think is somewhere and they encounter somebody en route, then they're justified in stopping and interrogating or arresting or detaining that person. That would encompass the entirety of the city of Minneapolis. What are we talking about here? Completely insane stuff. And again, this other Minneapolis police chief over here saying, yeah, we're getting countless reports of civil rights violations, countless reports of people being brazenly racially profiled. That's what these agents are doing. They're running around looking for typically isolated non-white people and then going up to them demanding papers. If they feel that they haven't sufficiently proved that they're a U.S. citizen on the spot, then they're black bagging him and throwing them into unmarked cars and disappearing them to who knows where. Now, again, another angle on this, in terms of the brazen racial profiling, this is from St. Paul, where a resident said that a federal officer knocked on her door and asked her to identify the Hmong and Asian households in her North End neighborhood. They say, "This is for your safety. We need to find this person," according to this Lugert Thom, who said that she doesn't know why they came to her home. She said, "They specifically asked me if I knew where the Hmong families lived on my street and in my neighborhood." She responded, "I don't know anything about that." And she said they then asked, "Well, what about the Asian families? What about the Asian families?" We're now at the stage where they're not just racially profiling random people on the street, but they're going door to door and asking neighbors to snitch on their neighbors by race. I mean, listen, we make the comparison, like leftists are criticized all the time for making the comparison to Nazi Germany. What is this shit? What is Gestapo thugs going up to people's doors and demanding that they reveal the ethnicity of their neighbors to provide papers? I mean, it's a literal papers, please society that we have at this point. Now, again, moving on to sort of the ramping up of the rhetoric here from the Trump administration, Stephen Miller actually tweeted this out. He said, "Only federal officers, meaning ICE and DHS and CBP, are upholding the law. Local and state police have been ordered to stand down and surrender." This is the Deputy White House Chief of Staff is saying local and state police have been ordered to stand down and surrender to ICE agents and to DHS. Guys, I'm not the type to be hyperbolic most of the time in this kind of a situation, but how do you describe this other than, okay, we're kind of approaching like Civil War-esque kind of territory here, where you would have a face-off between the federal government and state and local authorities, where the federal government is demanding that they stand down and surrender. I mean, we're at the point now where, and this was incredible, I didn't pull it up for this video, but the Minneapolis or the Minnesota National Guard were deployed by Tim Walz, right? Not to protect anybody necessarily, but he deployed the National Guard, and he deployed them with like shiny vests, like bright green vests over their military uniforms. And the reason they did that is so that they could distinguish themselves from the ICE agents and the DHS agents who are also wearing military-looking uniforms. So now you're at the point where you have like two different sects of military-looking men, right? And then also police who apparently are telling each other to stand down and surrender. Right? I mean, we're at the point where the National Guard is having to actively differentiate themselves so that random people on the street don't see them walking around and assume that they're the Gestapo thugs about to crack their skulls. Now, next thing here, again, in terms of the unlimited authority that apparently ICE believes that they have. Here from the Associated Press, they say, breaking, immigration officers are asserting sweeping power to enter homes without a judge's warrant. They want to use, just as a justification for entering somebody's home, busting down their door, what's called an administrative warrant that can basically just be drawn up on the spot by any random ICE officer. So now, I mean, this, guys, it's no exaggeration to say this is the end of the Fourth Amendment in this country, right? You are supposed to have protections in this country against federal officers storming your house, right, without a warrant from a judge. And this is what these ICE agents are claiming that they have the authority to do. Now, another one here from ABC. They say thousands of people have been arrested during ICE operations in Minnesota over the past 2 weeks. Multiple attorneys allege that for some of those detained, including at least one U.S. citizen, DHS is denying their constitutional right to see an attorney. So we have racial profiling, brazen racial profiling. We have the denial of the ability to see an attorney, including for U.S. citizens who are arrested by the DHS or by ICE. And we also have them granting themselves the authority to bust into your house without a warrant. Now, specifically, in this article, there was this amazing quote here. They say one ICE agent said, if we let you see your clients, we would have to let all the attorneys see their clients. And imagine the chaos. And then they say that I said to that person, yeah, you do have to let the attorneys see their clients. You do have to accommodate that. That's the fucking Constitution. You chose to put them here. I didn't bring this guy here. You did, said one of the attorneys. Guys, again, we're talking about basic constitutional rights for everybody in this country. You have a right, if you are detained by the federal government, by your local police force, whoever it may be, if you are arrested and thrown into jail or thrown into some detention facility, you have a right to see an attorney, period. That's non-negotiable. This is what our constitutional rights allow us to have. And here you have an ICE agent saying it would be chaos if we let everybody see their attorneys. And the attorney's looking back at him and he's like, okay, whose fault is that? That you guys are rounding up people for no justifiable reason. And then you're saying, oh, we're too overbooked. We can't let everybody see their attorneys. That would be chaos. It's like you created this situation in the first place. Completely insane. Now, we also have here from Judd Legum, who says ICE has stopped paying for medical treatment for 73,000 detainees. He says ICE has not paid its bills to third-party providers since October. So this was months and months and months back that they stopped doing this. And the situation will likely persist for months going forward, according to a Popular Information investigation. And now you have some of these providers who are stopping providing the medicine to the people who desperately need it in ICE custody because they're not being paid by ICE. Now, to be clear, we all saw the recent ICE budget that was passed. If you ranked them in terms of global military budgets, they would be top 10 in the world. It's not like they don't have the money to be able to pay for people's desperately needed medical services and medicines that they need in order to survive. They're actively choosing not to do this. They're actively choosing to put people's lives in danger. We've had how many countless deaths already in some of these ICE facilities? Here from Representative Pramila Jayapal. We had another one here. This is a story that I mentioned a few weeks ago. Two men in ICE detention say that they saw guards kill a fellow detainee. Now the Trump administration is trying to deport the witnesses. As she says here, this looks a lot like a cover-up. We need an independent investigation now. So this is an utterly insane story here, guys. Let's go ahead and read a little bit of the details. So they say here from the Washington Post, the Trump administration is seeking to deport two men who provided accounts of the January 3rd death of Geraldo Lunas Campos at a Texas detention camp. It's called East Montana in Texas, confusingly, but at Fort Bliss. And they say that differed from the Department of Homeland Security's description of the incident. So Santos Jesus Flores and Antonio Escon Fermetta, two detainees at Camp East Montana who both have criminal convictions, said in phone interviews to the Washington Post this week that they witnessed Lunas Campos engaged in a struggle with guards before his death. Flores claimed that he saw guards choking Lunas Campos to death. They say in a statement on Thursday, this is the DHS account of what happened. Tricia McLaughlin, the DHS Assistant Secretary, said that Lunas Campos had tried to take his own life and guards were trying to save him, saying Campos violently resisted the security staff and continued to attempt to take his life, and during the ensuing struggle, Campos stopped breathing and lost consciousness. I mean, we are at totally unfathomable levels of Orwellian speech here from the government. They're actually trying to claim that, no, we didn't kill this guy, right? He was trying to kill himself. We stepped in as the saviors to try to stop him from doing that. And then something, he ended up dying. Oops. What? Who believes this shit? Who could possibly believe this shit? Now, by the way, you look a little bit down here, turns out the local medical examiner in El Paso's county office said in a recorded phone call to the Washington Post that the office is likely to classify Lunas Campos' death as a homicide, subject to the results of a toxicology report. The employee said that a doctor there is listing the preliminary cause of death as asphyxia due to neck and chest compressions. Now, I'm not a doctor, but you guys tell me, was this guy giving himself chest compression and asphyxia to the neck, or could it have maybe been the ICE officers strangling him, as was accounted by the two witnesses who they're now trying to deport out of the country so that they can't testify? This is an obvious cover-up. And by the way, guys, there are legal protections. There's a specific carve-out visa for even if you are an undocumented immigrant, right? If you are a witness to a crime, especially a violent crime, you have to be able to stay in the country to be able to testify. They have that legal right. That's a very basic standard that we have in this country. So they're quickly trying to throw them out of the country to make that process more difficult. I mean, again, obvious cover-up of what seems like a brazen murder in one of these detention centers. And by the way, this same detention center, Camp East Montana at Fort Bliss in Texas, has like 60 plus different complaints against it over the last couple of months, including, as I was pointing out earlier, denying people their medicines that they need to survive. Now, final couple of things here. This was a wild video that was covered by CBS News Minnesota, where the police, I guess this was the police, the ATF, and ICE, who were conducting this raid on the wrong apartment, the totally wrong apartment. They went to the wrong address and raided the place, arrested everybody, dragged them outside, and wrecked their entire place, and then just left it there. Let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this.
This is the moment it begins. Ring video shows law enforcement officers with long guns moving in, busting through the door before entering this South Minneapolis apartment building. The Hennepin County Sheriff's Office say they were executing multiple search warrants for a firearm stolen from a federal vehicle Wednesday night. Another angle shows officers inside searching this unit before taking the camera down. Outside, towards the back of the building, a young woman in handcuffs being walked out.
She said she was just scared to death she felt scared, I'm sure they could tell.
And this is what's left behind, an apartment flipped upside down.
I don't even know where to start. It's like, I just want to cry.
Search warrant documents left behind show the intended target was apartment 2926.
It won't even close.
Elisa Porter says that's the unit above her, and the tenant moved out 2 months ago.
I just know he was my neighbor, that's it. That's all I know.
Mail for Porter lists her address at 2928.
But this is not even the place you're supposed to be at looking for anything.
She says police had no right to target her place, leaving her confused, outraged, and without answers.
All my clothes thrown over there in the corner. They pulled they just took everything just apart. I don't even know.
What are you even supposed to do in this situation? Like, this is the level of criminality that we're talking about here. They break in to the wrong apartment, drag everybody outside, rip the place up. I mean, it seems like they ripped up every single thing that was in that entire apartment, right? Shit thrown all over the floors, thrown at the walls, tipped over, broken, shattered. What is this person supposed to do? And by the way, taking down the cameras while they're in the middle of this operation. Hey, why are you taking down the cameras? To hide evidence of your criminal behavior? I mean, it's so completely insane. And there's no sort of recourse for any of this. Like, again, they just left. They're like, oops, guess we didn't find everything and anything after, ripping up your entire apartment. Guess we'll leave now. Have fun with that. Just completely wrecked her life. Totally insane. Just a random average person gets their house broken into. Now, final couple things here. Because, of course, the response from Democrats, to say that it's pathetic would be the understatement of the century. But I also can't say that it's not predictable, given that these are the same Democrats who have worked alongside Republicans for years and years and years to bolster ICE funding. Here we have Senator Cory Booker doing the most Democrat of Democrat things here. I guess this is the so-called compromise position. He says, today I'm taking action to bring accountability to federal law enforcement like ICE. New legislation I'm announcing will require ICE to adopt rigorous training hiring standards and for their agents to wear body cameras. These are best practices used by law enforcement agencies across our country. We need to bring transparency and accountability to ICE in order to make Americans safer. So in other words, what are we talking about? We're going to do another increase in the funding of the Gestapo. We're going to make them wear body cameras. Because what I remember in terms of the main thing that tipped off this major response over the last couple of weeks here was the killing of Renee Good. The guy who shot Renee Good in Minneapolis was recording himself. He literally had his phone out recording him murder a 37-year-old woman in broad daylight. That was captured from 10 different angles in the street. Did that result in any sort of accountability? No, the federal government is trying to target her widow now. They're not going after Jonathan Ross, the guy who shot her. They're going after the widow who was protesting in the street. What is a body camera going to do? They're doing all of this in front of cameras. Like, they're not shy about it. I'm sure there's some stuff that's not being captured on camera, but a lot of this is already being documented. The problem isn't necessarily the documentation. The problem is there's no accountability. You have the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, saying these ICE officers have absolute immunity. What are you going to do about that? Like, what are you actually going to do about that? Other than saying, well, we need a little bit more funding for training. No, I actually don't want a better trained Gestapo. Okay? I mean, this is, again, classic establishment Democrat nonsense bullshit. At some point, you're going to have to stand up if you don't want this country to, go full 100% fascist. But that's the direction that we're heading anyways. Now, I'll finish off with this because, as I said, the police, not going to save us. Obviously, the government, not going to save us. Democrats, not going to save us. So we got to save ourselves. Now, this is something that I think is a little bit uplifting. I've seen this across many places in Minnesota and around the country. You have local people who have every right under the Second Amendment, right? Where are my right-wing Second Amendment advocates now? Suddenly that's gone out the window, given that it's left-wing people doing it. But they have, legally owned firearms, and they're simply, observing. They're going out into the streets to protect their neighbors and, to be there as a show of force and to assert their rights and, again, to observe what's happening. Now, I'm not calling for any violence of the sorts or shootouts in the streets. Definitely not. But, at some point, when you have situations like this propping up all around the country, when ICE agents are not abiding by the law, when they're acting completely lawlessly and violent, and they approach people with their guns raised with no justification for stopping them or talking to them whatsoever, eventually you're going to have some sort of a clash. Now, I also think at the same time, if ICE pulls up to do a raid somewhere and they see a dozen people like this guy kitted out, they're probably going to be a little bit more hesitant to use the kind of force that we've seen them using, to deploy the kind of violence that we've seen them deploying. So I think it's a positive thing. Obviously, hope it doesn't escalate into anything, too significant. But, at some level, if the government is violating your rights, if they're acting completely lawlessly, you're going to have to show up in the streets and, make yourself known. So I'll leave you guys off with that. Absolutely insane, unhinged shit going on, not just in Minnesota, but this is also happening around the country. Obviously, the focus has been in Minneapolis and St. Paul over the last couple of weeks. But, this shit has to stop at some point.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying